Mm.
Well, this is The Congregation. I am Dimitri Ravanos, your host. I'm joined, as I will be every week, by SEC editor of Armchair All-Americans, Chris Phillips. Chris, thanks for hanging out with me tonight.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, and I'm happy to be here and excited for football, excited for the season to get kicked off.
Yeah, me too. I was talking about this in a piece I wrote for another website I understand baseball fans, especially the seam heads, as they call themselves, pine for the season during the winter months, but I really don't think there is a fan base that is as starved for their sport as college football fans. Not football fans, college football fans specifically.
No, I absolutely agree with you, and especially in the SEC and down south. I mean, it's not a 4 months out of the year type thing. It's 365 days a year, 24/7. I think anybody that's been around, it's something that you kind of just have to experience. And I have a lot of friends, especially in Charlotte, being sort of a transplant city. A lot of people that are from up north, the Midwest, where have you. They like football. They understand. They don't really get the craze down here, if you will, and everybody's just amazed when they come down. So it's without a doubt, like our show describes, it's a religion down in the South, and can't be topped for sure.
Right. We called it The Congregation for that very reason. So rather than give you a rundown of everything happening in week one, and we're going to do this every week, we will focus on either the biggest stories, things that intrigue us, and we'll kind of jump all around the conference here. So let's start with this. I think this is a question that has been asked at the top of the season, every season for, I'm going to say, at least the last 5 years, maybe if not longer. What exactly has Alabama done to this conference? I mean, I think this year you can say, what have they done to college football in general? Because there's this separation, right? Like if you're talking about the best teams in the country this year, there is Alabama, there's Florida State, there's Ohio State, there's a drop-off. Then there is this group that includes probably Penn State, Washington, and USC. And then there's an even bigger drop-off to everybody else. So what exactly has Alabama done to college football in general under Nick Saban?
Well, they've won. That's first off.
Right.
They've kind of developed a reload approach, if you will. And I mean, whatever Nick Saban is doing, we know what he's doing is high-level recruiting and just the level of coach he is. I think he's, if not the best coach, he's one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the country. He's brought Alabama to an unprecedented height. I mean, even with the loss last year to Clemson, I mean, you look at what Alabama's done, the national championships they won under Saban, and they've obviously really distanced themselves from the rest of, not only the country, but the SEC for sure. I mean, it's kind of a different playing field, and everyone in the SEC seems to be trying to play catch up to Alabama. So Nick Saban, I think they've definitely raised the bar, and they've raised the expectation level of not only themselves, but everyone in the conference.
Yeah, I wonder if the level that Nick Saban has achieved at is hurting the conference. Because I will tell you that I do think that they are, sort of the class of this conference this year and among the programs that you would call the class of college football in 2017. But at the same time, I don't think it is out of the question that they lose to Auburn. I mean, I really don't. I think that Auburn sort of has that kind of team, and in particular, that kind of quarterback that has given Alabama fits the last 2 times they've lost Auburn. But at the same time, because Saban and Alabama are who they are, we look at the SEC and we don't see another team in the preseason top 10, and we either dismiss it as, the SEC is overblown, Saban has an easier road than people are giving him credit for. Say it however you want to say it. I do wonder what all the success at Alabama has done to the rest of the SEC, because this doesn't seem to be a situation of a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to first off say, even being in the SEC department, and I'm not one to, pull for an entire conference, if we all know that's kind of blasphemy down in these parts. But, I mean, I think what Nick Saban has done, it's hard to say that someone winning is going to ruin a conference, but it kind of has seemed that way. It seems like it's just when people from the outside kind of look into the conference, and even around, here it's Alabama and then everyone else, and Alabama sort of is carrying the conference. They're the only elite team in the SEC. But I actually think, and we'll get into it a little bit, I'm sure a little bit later, but I actually think this year could be an interesting season for Alabama football. I mean, I wouldn't, like you were saying, wouldn't be surprised at all if they lost to Auburn on the Plains. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to Florida State on Saturday night.
I agree with you. I tend to think, if Nick Saban does anything well, and there's obviously a lot he does well, but if there's anything he does well, is that he gets his team up for week one, right? Like, just look at the way that team struggled and still managed to put, 52 up against USC last year.
And especially in those neutral site games.
Right, but at the same time, he's never played an opponent like this in week one, right? I mean, like, he played, I think the first time they did one of these neutral site games, it was against a top 10 Clemson team, but I think we very quickly saw that was an overrated Clemson team.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you were mentioning, it takes a certain type of team and definitely a certain type of quarterback to beat a Nick Saban team. I mean, you look at what Deshaun Watson did to the Alabama defense. I mean, even though they lost the first national title game, I mean, he absolutely shredded the Alabama defense. And the threat to run and pass both, I think, really gave Nick Saban fits. But, I mean, they lose a ton on defense coming into this season. I know we're talking more so about what they've done over a long period, but just looking at 2017, they lose a ton on defense, and while Alabama recruits at an extremely high level, I mean, they have 2-3 deep of 5-star recruits, waiting in the wings. It's a lot easier said than done to just kind of play and plug guys in and just reload like that. So it'll be interesting to see, especially on the defensive side, who's going to step up as a leader. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think Florida State, if they can give DeAndre Francois any type of time in the pocket, I think he's going to be able to have a really good day against him. Like I said, it wouldn't shock me at all to see Florida State come away victorious in Atlanta Saturday night.
That's where I think you make a good point, is with as much as they have to reload on defense this season, I think, I personally think Jeremy Pruitt deserves a lot of credit for what that defense was able to do last year, but he's going to get painted with, well, those are Kirby Smart's guys. He walked into probably the best situation that any defensive coordinator maybe ever has in college football, right? But this year, it is a matter of completely having to not rebuild that defense, because you're right, they've recruited at a high level for so long. I think, was it last season that they had 6 5-star guys or 6 former 5-star guys along the defensive line that they could mix and match however they wanted? So
it was, yep.
Yeah, so it's going to be a reload kind of situation, but what you're having to rebuild is that leadership, especially losing a guy like Reuben Foster, a guy like Jonathan Allen, 2 guys who were not just so big in terms of production, but also were huge in terms of they weren't just starters, they were 3-year starters, right? And that makes a huge impact on what your defense can do when you've been hearing the same leadership voice for that long.
Yeah, and I think on the other side, Jalen Hurts has a lot to prove as well, that he can throw the football down the field. I mean, we saw last season, obviously he's a true freshman quarterback. What he did was, phenomenal, but it's going to be very interesting to see. I think both quarterbacks in this game, Francois and Jalen Hurts, have a ton to prove.
Yeah,
and people are going to, dissect this game and really pick apart those 2 guys on the way they perform Saturday night. But it'll be really interesting to see. They've got Bo Scarborough coming back. They've got the great wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who obviously his stats dipped last season, due to the ineffectiveness of getting the ball down the field. And I think one of the most astonishing things about this run Alabama's had, under Nick Saban, is their ability to win when they weren't necessarily above average, or even, we're very average at the quarterback position. I mean, you look at guys like Blake Barnett winning, the national title, and, with all due respect to A.J. McCarron and Greg McElroy, it's been amazing what Nick Saban's been able to do with, subpar or just right at average talent at that position.
Well, you said Blake Barnett. I think you meant, the kid that transferred in from Florida State, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Jacob Coker.
Yeah.
Yep.
You look at those guys, and look, I think McCarron was a legit great quarterback. I really do. I think if he were in a more pass-heavy offense, he probably would have been painted a different light going into the pros. But I will say, I know it's an unpopular thing to say because of the way Kiffin exited. They're going to miss him this year. They really are, because consider what he took quarterback-wise. Consider what he took to the college football playoffs. A converted running back, a cast off from Florida State that couldn't win the starting job one year over a converted running back, and then a true freshman. I mean, you say what you want about Kiffin and the immaturity and the way he goes about handling his business and his ego and all that kind of stuff. He made a huge difference. He forced Nick Saban to come into the modern age. I don't know that Saban has that 4th national championship at Alabama without Kiffin pushing this offense into modernity.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, as much as I'm going to miss watching Kiffin and Saban kind of get each other's throats on the sideline, and obviously, he's there's a lot of bad blood with him in the SEC with how the things at Tennessee ended, but he's a great coach. There's no question that he knows offense, and I definitely think that's a bigger loss than is being made out to be. And we'll obviously get into the new hire at that offensive coordinator position later in the show. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how this Alabama offense, how Jalen Hurts develops, like I said, as a quarterback, as a downfield passer, and I do think there will be an impact of that loss of losing Kiffin to Florida Atlantic.
All right, well, we brought up Lane Kiffin, so let's sort of pivot here and talk about the coaching hot seat in the SEC, because obviously coming into the season, I don't know that I can remember a year where more guys are rumored on varying degrees of hot seat. So let's start with this. Who, in your mind, is the first SEC coach to get fired this year?
Wow, first SEC coach to get fired. There's a couple. There's a number of them, like you said. There's a ton on the hot seat. I think there'll be 3 or 4 probably open jobs by season's end. I think the first one to go is Butch Jones. I really do. I think, and it's obviously going to depend on records, but I think if Butch Jones goes anywhere between 5-7 and 7-5, I think it's all the same to Tennessee fans. I think it's going to be tough to keep him.
I'm gonna tell you something that I've been told by a couple of different reporters with way better contacts than I have in Knoxville. And at first I couldn't believe it, but then the more I thought about it, the more this makes sense. Butch Jones is safe because the administration at Tennessee realizes how far that program had to come back from the Derek Dooley years. There is a general belief now, with hindsight being 2020, there's a general belief in Tennessee that Lane Kiffin didn't just do a good job. Lane Kiffin was on the verge of putting it all together in a big way for that program if he had stayed, let's say, even to year 2, right? Like, if he had just had some continuity there, because you got to consider who all was on his staff and how well they recruited so quickly. Then you switch over to Derek Dooley, who, man, was really good for Louisiana Tech, but got to Knoxville. It's like he had never seen a football game before. So Jones, I think, is more, he's created this, I don't know, this weird position for himself by virtue of never shutting up, right? Like he will never stop with the champions at life kind of thing.
The life champions, right?
Right, with the 5-star heart and that kind of stuff. And that's why I think the situation looks so much worse than it actually is. I mean, that's not to say that losing how many guys transferred in the middle of the season last year. I mean, that's not to say that's not a big deal. But remember, this is the only program not named Alabama, not named Florida, that has won 9 games each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that with the expectations they had last season, losing to South Carolina, losing to Vanderbilt down the road, it's just, I just know, I understand, I think people around the SEC know the expectations in Knoxville. And I think if he goes 5-7 or 6-6, he may get one more year. But I think after that, it's just going to be so hard for Tennessee fans to keep him around, just because, like you said, he's given them so much of this coach speak, of these cliches over and over and over again. And I know personally as a fan, I would be pretty fed up with it. Like I said, it'll be really interesting to see how the fans, the boosters, everyone at Tennessee reacts to it if they do go 5-7 or 6-6. But I mean, not to say they will, but I definitely think with a new quarterback, with all the pieces they lost last season in their schedule, they're staring a pretty tough year right in the face. So
yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, where the chips may fall. Now, another guy I know we were going to talk about that I think was probably my number 2 or maybe tied for first guy to lose their job first is Kevin Sumlin. And
all right, so call me crazy. I'm one of the people that believes he's going to have a great season and save his job this year.
And it's going to start, obviously, as we know, Sunday night, week 1 against UCLA. That's going to be kind of the hot seat bowl, if you will,
right,
with Jim Mora and Kevin Sumlin. I think both teams desperately need that game, not only for their coaches, just for their seasons in general, but especially for their head coaches. But yeah, I kind of worry that if Sumlin goes 8-4, he really might seriously be feeling the heat, just because it's kind of been the same thing over and over and over again. And as we saw at Georgia, not saying that the expectations at A&M are as high as they are at Georgia, I'm not sure that they are or they aren't, but even when you're winning, if a program is kind of stuck in one place, isn't trending upwards, it can be tough to keep your job. So it'll be interesting to see there as well.
you can't keep your job without a double win season if your fan base, the people that support you, have declared August 4th as Kevin Sumlin Day because they're so used to going 8-4, right? I mean, like that is a fun joke that Texas A&M fans like to tell. I think that the situation when your athletic director comes out and says you are on the hot seat, I mean, it's serious, right? Like I think that it is even possible that Kevin Sumlin could go 9-3, and if those 3 losses include Alabama, Auburn, and LSU, you can't keep the guy, right? Like at that point, it's very clear that he is stuck in a position that either he doesn't have the resources to get out of, which is not true. Texas A&M completely overhauled everything about their program when they joined the SEC, or he doesn't have the talent to get over that. And I don't know that that's necessarily true overall. I think someone could get fired at A&M and then go land at another Power 5 gig. He just may not have the talent to do it in the SEC. He may not have the talent to do it when he's staring up at a Nick Saban every single year. So it's going to be interesting. I tend to think that they are going to finish right behind Auburn for 3rd place in the West. But, you know, it is one of those things I will believe and be in shock no matter what happens at Texas A&M this season.
And to your point, that's one thing I completely agree with you. Whatever happens with Kevin Sumlin, I think there's, like you're mentioning with the athletic director coming out and basically putting him on the hot seat, I think there's a pretty good chance he loses his job after this season. It's really going to take a really good effort for them to keep him around. But Kevin Sumlin is a very, very good football coach. He will have no problem finding another job, another really good job if he wants it. To your point, I think, 8-4, 9-3. It's interesting. Not all 8-4s are made the same. I think we know that. An 8-4, but with a win over Alabama, I think someone gets to come back the next year. Like you were saying, you lose to all your rivals in the West. I think if he goes 8-4, it's a toss-up depending on what type of 8-4 is. I think if he goes any worse than 8-4, it's 100% he's getting fired. I just think at that point they're going to move on. But yeah, Sumlin's a great coach, man. He would be an excellent hire for anybody to have.
Yeah, and I am not saying that I know anything. I absolutely do not. This is 100% just speculative. But I think, at least in my mind, living here in North Carolina, there's a very obvious reason that your AD comes out and says, yeah, we really have to see something from Kevin Sumlin. We don't know what is going to happen at North Carolina with the NCAA yet, right? Larry Fedora is a College Station guy. He's got pretty deep roots in Texas. I'm not saying that I know for certain that that would be their target, but if you want a guy that can go out and put up the kind of offense, have the kind of personality that can compete with Tom Herman at Texas, Larry Fedora seems like the obvious choice. And if not Larry Fedora, Chad Morris at SMU. Like, it seems like there are too many good options out there for A&M to accept. You say 8-4. I say anything below 9-3. I have a feeling they're moving on from Kevin Sumlin.
Yeah, and with all due respect to all the people in Chapel Hill, I got to think it'd be a little bit easier to recruit to Texas A&M and College Station, the SEC, than to UNC. I mean, just saying, if he can put together that type of offense and have the type of year they had, I believe it was 2 years ago, with that type of offensive firepower, I definitely think Fedora would be a great hire for them. But yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, like I said, someone's a really good coach, but I think he's in a situation where he has to win now, and that's kind of the name of the game in college football now. And especially, like you said, when your athletic director puts that kind of pressure on you, puts the heat on you. I mean, I think one of the big things they're looking at too, he really hasn't had a quarterback since Johnny Manziel. No, I think Johnny Manziel sort of, you could argue, sort of made him, because since then you've had Kenny Hill, whatever.
Right.
He was great for one game against South Carolina where he torched them for 500 yards and then sort of fell apart, transferred to TCU. And now coming into this season, they're in another quarterback battle. I'm not sure they've even decided on a starting quarterback yet for UCLA. So it's going to be a really interesting season for them. But my best bet would be that Kevin Sumlin's out at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right. I do think that the smart money would be there. I think that one of the things that got him to this point maybe this isn't even on Kevin Sumlin. This might be squarely on Trevor Knight. But A&M put so much stock in the fact that the last quarterback to really just destroy Alabama was Trevor Knight when he was playing at Oklahoma. I was at the Superdome for that Sugar Bowl, and it was one of those things where my dad and I were looking at each other going, how do they not know what's coming every single time? Trevor Knight he was playing like Cam Newton, and Trevor Knight is absolutely not Cam Newton, right? And so when they go to Tuscaloosa last year and Trevor Knight tries that draw up the middle that was killing Alabama when he played for Oklahoma, and Jonathan Allen literally dove over the offensive line, you kind of knew, oh, this isn't that Trevor Knight anymore, and this isn't that Alabama defense anymore. And, suddenly A&M, who was super hot, right? They were number 6 in the country, I think, coming into that game.
Right.
It wasn't just they lost that game. It was like that was the beginning of the collapse that the Alabama game is every year under Kevin Sumlin.
Yeah, and I just kind of going off the radar for a second. I think one of the other coaches in the SEC that's kind of a dark horse, on the hot seat is Gus Malzahn.
I agree with you.
I think that, with all this hype around Jarrett Stidham, and it feels like the same movie. It's like the movie I've seen, and at the end of the movie, right. The ship still sinks. A couple years ago, I can't even remember the quarterback's name because that's how bad he was.
James Franklin III.
Right, yeah, and they had just a absolute abysmal year. I think this is a huge year for Gus Malzahn, and there's only so many years that Auburn fans are going to put up with not meeting expectations and also losing to Alabama.
Right.
I can't, having to kind of live in Alabama's shadow almost. It'll be really interesting to see how Gus Malzahn plays out. They obviously get Alabama, at the Plains in November, so that'll be a big game for them. But how Jarrett Stidham plays will be a lot determining factor of whether Gus Malzahn, how hot his seat gets by season's end.
Yeah, look, I know Gus Malzahn's restaurant of choice is a Waffle House, but still, you can only dine out on the Kick Six for so long when all the guys that were true freshmen on that team are gone now, right? Like all the true freshmen on that team were seniors last year, and they have not beaten Alabama since. And the other thing I think people need to remember with Malzahn is if LSU was 1 second faster, it's Malzahn that gets fired last year. Right. After that game. Not saying that Miles wouldn't have ended up in the same place. I think that train was going to one specific destination with Miles. But I think if LSU was 1 second faster, Malzahn is already out of a job. We've talked about a lot of coaches on the hot seat, and we haven't even talked about the one that I think is going to get fired first, and that's Bret Bielema. Because I don't think that it is just a matter of he has underachieved at Arkansas. It is that the Belk Bowl was embarrassing for that program. The way they let Virginia Tech not just come back, Virginia Tech stomped Arkansas's ass in the second half of that game. It was ugly. It was as bad as I've ever seen Arkansas play. And now, granted, there is a huge difference in the type of recruiter that Bret Bielema is versus the type of recruiter that Bobby Petrino is. But Bielema couldn't even keep up a semblance of what Petrino had going on. So the talent is not there in the same way. And also, I don't think this gets talked about enough, right? With Texas A&M coming into the SEC, Arkansas suddenly becomes, I think, one of the most difficult jobs in the conference because now it's a little bit harder to get those Texas kids that want to play in the SEC to leave Texas. It's very hard if you are not named Nick Saban to get Louisiana kids to voluntarily leave Louisiana. There's not a huge crop of recruits in Arkansas. I think it takes a really special kind of dude to come to that program and have success. And Bielema seems to have the personality, but he just doesn't seem to pay it off. I think he has finished in the top. I think he's finished better than 5th in the SEC West only once. And hasn't he been there like 6 years at this point?
Yeah, he's been there a while for sure. Yeah, and I agree with you. There's only so many seasons where, listen, Bret Bielema is one of the most likable guys in the conference.
Right.
He's just absolute characters, fun to talk to, fun to watch at SEC media days and that. But that charm only lasts so long.
Right.
With that being said,
go ahead.
I was actually just going to say, I think Arkansas actually, has a chance for a decent season. I think they're going to be around a 6-6. Maybe 7-5 team, but I will say, because we were just talking about Auburn, I love Arkansas hosting Auburn at home in October. If I had to pick one early upset in the season, I love that matchup for Arkansas. They got embarrassed last year on the Plains. Auburn, I thought, really kind of rubbed their nose in the dirt. They beat them like 56-3.
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me at all to see Arkansas, beat Auburn at home. And if they did, that would be the type of win that would keep Bielema around. But yeah, it's a tough job, man. I mean, and just any job in the West in general, not named Alabama, Auburn, or LSU, is going to be a tough job to go up against those guys every day. Recruiting, trying to get the best athletes. So whoever goes in there, it'll be really interesting to see what type of, if he does get let go, what type of coach they get, because the style that Bielema runs is such a pound and ground. They have a certain type of identity, and if you go to get somebody completely different from that identity, you're probably obviously going to want to switch it up. There might be a 2 to 3 year at least adjustment period to try to get those type of athletes you need to run a different system. So, I'm not sure where things are headed for Arkansas this year, but I unfortunately I don't think they're trending up by any means. So it'll be interesting to see what that athletic department decides to do with Bielema.
Well, you brought up LSU, so I do have to ask your opinion on this, because I think the answer is 100% yes. Is it possible that Ed Orgeron was on the hot seat the very second he agreed to become LSU's next head coach?
I think anybody that got that job would be on the hot seat from day one.
I mean, like, how long realistically do you expect his leash is going to be? Because at LSU now, you're not just judged on your wins and loss record. It's your wins and loss record specifically against Alabama right now.
Yeah, I agree. I will say I didn't mind the hire at first, just because for the situation they were in. I feel like Ed Orgeron is LSU. I feel like he embodies everything LSU is, and he's kind of an LSU guy. Now, does that mean he's going to be a good head coach at LSU? Is he going to be able to beat Nick Saban, Gus Malzahn, beat the Alabama Auburns of the world? I don't know. LSU, that brand name, and we all know he's a great recruiter. They every year, whether they win or not, have one of the most talented rosters in the conference. I'm going to say no. I don't think he'll be a one and done. If they show any type of life on offense with Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator, I think fans will kind of cling on to that and kind of ride it out and see what he can do. Because I think that's been the biggest gripe they've had, obviously, with Les Miles, just the inability to develop any type of quarterback whatsoever. So if he can show that at all, I think that'll give LSU fans at least something to believe in, because I think the old adage goes, if you have a quarterback, you have hope. So if he can show any type of hope, I think LSU fans will cling on to that. And I think he'll make it longer than just one season in Baton Rouge.
I think it's interesting, and it speaks to the reputation of Matt Canada. And both you and I live in North Carolina, so I don't know about you, but living here in Raleigh, I remember when NC State fired Matt Canada, like, very loudly on the radio going, I'm pretty sure that was not the problem for that team, right? And then he goes on to Pitt, does an amazing job in 1 year with Pitt. And now at LSU, people are suddenly talking about Danny Etling like he could be competitive with any of these guys for the best quarterback in the SEC. And I think that is a real tip of the cap more to Matt Canada than it is to Danny Etling, because I'm still not entirely sure that is even close to being possibly real, right? That Etling had that kind of improvement in the offseason. Look, I think it's a very real possibility that Orgeron is one and done because of the circumstances under which he was hired. Like, I think it's pretty public knowledge now that Orgeron got the job basically because Tom Herman is a better businessman than Joe Alleva is, right? Alleva offered Tom Herman the job. All signs pointed to that Herman preferred LSU to Texas. But, Tom Herman has a really good agent that said, okay, let us have a day to talk to Texas. And Alleva found that unacceptable. And so the athletic director, the quote that I have heard was said in the room was, take it or leave it. I have another guy that wants the job right now, which is like, okay. I mean, like, I guess you can shake your yellow and purple pom-pom over that, but that doesn't really translate to wins. Ed Orgeron is one of these guys that, to me, is the absolute picture of it is possible to be a great coach and not be meant to be a head coach, right? Like, I think it is possible that this is one of the best defensive line minds in the country, that this is absolutely the best recruiter in the country right now. He just may not be cut out to be a head coach. Now, he clearly has learned a lot since his time at Ole Miss. I mean, look, those guys rallied for him at USC. Those guys rallied for him at LSU last year, just 2 stints as interim head coach. And I'm rooting for him, right? It's impossible not to root for Ed Orgeron. He is a dude whose parents are named Bebe and Coco. He has said, and I can't remember which one it is, but he has said he has a favorite Neville brother. I mean, this guy is a Cajun fairy tale come to life. You want to see him have success at LSU. I just don't know how realistic that is, given his coaching prowess versus Nick Saban's, even versus Kevin Sumlin's.
Yeah, and definitely speaking of Joe Alleva, I think not only is that a coaching situation on the hot seat, but also an athletic director situation on the hot seat, kind of shifting into that. Yeah, I mean, Tom Herman, it's funny. He was supposed to go to South Carolina. He was supposed to go to LSU, and he winds up at Texas. But yeah, it'll be really, really intriguing to see. I mean, obviously the Orgeron experiment at Ole Miss, I'm not sure that we would say that worked out very well, but he's a great recruiter. Like you said, he's a great assistant, great recruiter. I think he's really relatable. Players like him, but yeah, it'll be really interesting. And I think a lot of it will hinge too on what type of options they have, because LSU is the type of job that if it opens up, you're going to attract the best names in the country. You definitely should. You shouldn't settle for anything less than the best there.
Look, I think a lot of people think they have a better coach on staff named Dave Aranda. The problem, I think, and this is an SEC-wide problem, is since I'm going to say 14, 15, the SEC teams seem to eschew really good either group of five or smaller school Power 5 coaches in favor of hot coordinators, and it doesn't always work out. Right. So I'm not saying that Orgeron's job is in trouble by Dave Aranda. I'm just saying, like, I could very much see fans in Baton Rouge getting that feeling if things are not working out the way they want them to with Ed Orgeron.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed as well with the SEC is that, over the past couple of years with these new coaching hires, the SEC likes to stay in-house a lot as far as they like to hire guys that have been in the conference, have SEC experience, where I think is with other conferences, it's not so much something that they look at necessarily as a make or break type deal. But I think these athletic directors and these schools really like to have guys that, have recruited SEC territory, really have relationships there. And I definitely think there's some upside to that, but I also think you kind of lose out on maybe some of the bigger names and some of the more up and coming coaches from around the country that you could get. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, it'll be really, really interesting to see at LSU what happens. Because like I said, they have the athletes, and they've got Darius Geis coming back, who Danny Etling is going to turn around and hand the ball to. So,
and let's not forget, I think he's got a receiving core of 3 6'5" dudes. I mean, things should be really easy for Danny Etling, and I think the most experienced offensive line in the SEC. Things should be really easy for Danny Etling, which, when you say that out loud, all the weapons they have, it becomes very obvious why Les Miles had to go, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. This year's really a show me year for LSU. The fact I thought they were going to be a college football playoff team last fall. I mean, I think a lot of people did. They came in the season preseason ranked number 5, fell flat on their face against Wisconsin week 1. Right. So it'll be interesting to see. Like I said, if they can get anything out of the quarterback position with Danny Etling, it's definitely going to make Ed Orgeron's life a whole lot easier.
It's hard not to root for a guy that gave us the story. Surely you've heard the story of Ed Orgeron's first day with the team at Ole Miss.
Yeah, I've heard that one, actually.
Where he heard rumblings that there were a lot of guys that were not happy that David Cutcliffe was not their coach anymore. And so Ed Orgeron, this is the story I've heard, walked into the locker room, said, "I hear there are some guys here that wish I wasn't here." And as the story goes, Ed Orgeron ripped his shirt off and yelled, "Anybody who doesn't want me here can come fight me," which is as Ed Orgeron a story as you've ever heard in your life.
He's just such a football guy, and you gotta respect it. I mean, with the voice, the mannerisms, the attitude, you have to respect it. I mean, if he can win football games, like I said, they'll cling on to him, and they will take in Ed Orgeron arms wide open. So yeah, it'll be intriguing to see how they fare.
All right, so you mentioned the South Carolina job. It's funny, I did a Q&A for an NC State Back in the Pack, which is SB Nation's NC State website, earlier this week. Just kind of getting to know that, they kind of wanted to know just some fan base kind of stuff, really, about South Carolina. One of the things I was asked about was, how does the fan base feel about Will Muschamp? Now, you are a South Carolina fan, so you could probably answer this a little more honestly than I could. I said I thought that when the name was announced, I was doing a radio show in Columbia at the time. When the name was announced, I think there was this real scratch your head. I don't know if it's a sigh, like, of desperation or whatever, but when you heard that Kirby Smart was interviewing for that job, Tom Herman was interviewing for that job, Rich Rodriguez apparently was supposed to interview the very next day after Muschamp got named, I think this fan base was understandably disappointed with the name Muschamp, but it seems like that program is on the right road, just maybe not as fast as fans would like for them to be.
Right. Well, you got to think first to keep in mind that Will Muschamp was not following up one, but two legendary coaches. I mean, you had
Right.
Luke Holtz hired in 1998, or excuse me, 99. And then you had Steve Spurrier with the type of success that he had. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think most fans wanted Tom Herman. He was kind of the hot name thrown around. And South Carolina, I mean, for better, lack of a better word, sort of fell on their face trying to get him. I mean, I think it was all but a done deal, the famous Twitter sources saying it was all but a done deal, and that didn't come through, and Will Muschamp got hired. I was more so of the let's kind of wait and see type deal. Will Muschamp, I have to say, Will Muschamp, though, is the type of guy you want to run through a wall for. I mean, just listening to him talk, he's another type football guy, but he knows the X's and O's. He relates to players. He's a really relatable guy in general. But, yeah, I think the fan base definitely, after hearing what he had to say, I think that I know that South Carolina has never won big if they've not been tough.
Right.
And I think that's something that was missing at the end of the Spurrier era was a certain level of toughness. And that's one of Muschamp's, major calling cards is to bring that toughness, effort, toughness, and discipline is kind of like their mantra. So he definitely brought that to the program and seeing his biggest knock, I think everyone wanted to condemn him for his time at Florida, which was, he can't develop a quarterback. He has no offense. He recruits these great defensive guys, and he's a great recruiter, which I know South Carolina fans were welcome to see because if anyone that kind of followed the end of the Steve Spurrier era know that he absolutely – I mean, the recruiting efforts were non-existent at that point. So to get him in, my initial reaction was he's a really good recruiter. He relates to players. I think South Carolina fans are more so concerned with we need a younger coach that will come in and recruit his tail off and get the best possible talent in Columbia. And I think, with two recruiting classes and the way that he's used the talent that he already had on campus, he's definitely done that. Now in season, last year, year one of the Muschamp era, I think he took a really big chance in pulling the red shirt off Jake Bentley and putting him in halfway through the season. And, to see it pan out for him was great for South Carolina, but also was great for Will Muschamp. And now South Carolina comes into this fall, Will Muschamp not being known as having a good offense. South Carolina is projected to have one of the best offenses in the SEC. So he could really flip the script this fall as to, kind of proving the naysayers wrong that, he can't develop an offense. But, me personally, I think that a lot of people didn't give him a second chance and wanted to condemn Will Muschamp for what he did at Florida. I think he learned a lot from that experience there. And I think it's definitely shown just from last year. And I know South Carolina fans are very excited for what's to come in 2017 and just the potentials of this season. So overall, I think fans, while maybe skeptical at first, I think would be the best word. I think fans have really grown to enjoy and really appreciate the work that Muschamp has done and is doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, I think it's very realistic that South Carolina is the team in terms of execution and quality plays. I think it's very realistic that South Carolina is the team that makes the biggest leap in the East and still finishes 6-6. I just think that is the case. The East is still a race between Georgia and Florida, at least for this year. And I think Jake Bentley is getting there. I'm not as high on him as some people are. I'm really concerned about the prospects for him developing behind that offensive line. I know they have one more year of experience, and I know they're not going to be as young up front as they were last year, and he's got great targets. So there's a lot of reason to think that those struggles that plagued this team in the beginning of 2016 are not going to be there in the beginning of 2017. It's just I've covered this team for the last 3 years, and if you're telling me good things are going to happen, at this point, I'll believe it when I see it. I think that if you were telling me that I could have any duo of wide receivers in the SEC, I'm not saying Samuel and Edwards would be at the top of my list, but it'd be really hard to dismiss them. I think Brian Edwards, I think a lot of what South Carolina can be is going to depend on, is Brian Edwards capable of being everything we were told he was going to be when he came to campus, right? Because this guy wasn't the next Pharaoh Cooper. This guy was Brian Edwards 1.0, right? Like, I think the way he was sold is that South Carolina receivers in the future are going to be compared to Edwards, and he's got all the tools. I just think one of the things that sort of plagued him last season, number one, was that minor injury at the beginning of the year that made it kind of tough for him to stay on the field for long stretches of time. And two, no one had time to throw him the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think the biggest key for that team is going to be the offensive line. I mean, you just struggled mightily at times last year, especially against the better defensive lines of Florida, Clemson, where Jake Bentley had, literally no time to throw at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, forget Bentley, right? Like, you had a true freshman playing quarterback before Bentley and McElwain, and
right.
McElwain's whole thing was supposed to be, yes, he can run, but man, wait till you see him throw. He never had time to throw. He was on the run seemingly every time he dropped back.
Yeah, no, definitely. That O-line struggled all year. I think they gave up 41 sacks, close to last in the conference. But the upside for them, I think what they're looking at, you have 4 starters returning, 98 total starts, year 2 in that system. I think with another year of experience as far as Bentley, when it was able to go through 15 bowl practices, was able to go through all the spring practice, all the summer. He's not only going to be able to, that O-line I think will be improved moving to this year. You move Zach Bailey out to right tackle, your best offensive lineman. You've got Malik Young at left tackle. You finally got a little depth in that O-line. I mean, the entire right side of that O-line was solved before you even came into fall camp. I think the only one position was really up in the air, which was left tackle, which was a battle there, but Malik Young was the expected winner of that position. But I think one of the bigger benefits as well for Jake Bentley, because I think a lot of the sacks last season did go on the quarterback. And I think Bentley, being another year experienced, being a guy that will be able to alter protections, call out of bad plays. I mean, last year, I'm going to say it, even though it was overused over and over again, the kid should have been in high school. I mean, how young this team was. You had a freshman lead you in passing, a freshman lead you in receiving, a freshman lead you in rushing. You've got all that coming back. You've got a healthy Deebo Samuel, a position that last season was absolutely a crutch for them, which was wide receiver. You only had Deebo and Brian Edwards. You now have Brian Edwards, Deebo. You've got another youngster in Ortre Smith. You've got another youngster that's starting in Shi Smith, who the coaches are absolutely in love with. You've actually got a stable of 5 to 6 great wide receivers. You've got 2 all-SEC caliber tight ends. And
right, I was about to say, don't forget about Cosby. Don't forget about Hurst, who is, I think, talked about it at this point. It's so funny to me to see when the first-team SEC selections came out from the coaches, like how far ahead Hurst was of whoever was second team.
Yeah, he's definitely primed to have a huge season. You have all those weapons around you. And, I definitely, Dimitri, understand your cautiousness with kind of crowning Jake Bentley, because it is kind of scary to have a kid. I mean, he only played 7 games. To have a guy catch that much hype in preseason,
right?
I think it's just coming from the fact that when you watch Jake Bentley play, and as much as, fans wanted Brandon McElwain to kind of be that guy, and as much as fans appreciated Perry Orth for what he did, you could see something different with Jake Bentley. The kid's got a real big league arm. He's got a moxie about him. He's a coach's son, something that South Carolina fans haven't seen since a guy they might know, Connor Shaw. He kind of carries himself in that way. He has a lot of confidence. And, obviously just hearing everything from camp, from summer, from fall, that he's really taken ownership, that this is his team. You have to think that in year 2, the biggest jump from what I've heard for a quarterback is from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah.
So, I mean, while I think it's a lot of pressure on him, if this offensive line, that's going to be the key. If this offensive line can give him 3 to 5 seconds to throw, he's going to have the ability to have a big season, but he can't do it when he's laying on his back.
Yeah, I would say that coming into this season, as much as is expected out of Bentley, I think he is under a lot less pressure than Jacob Eason, because I don't think I can remember a freshman quarterback coming in touted as highly as Jacob Eason was. Remember, like when Richt first went to Miami and suddenly Eason pulled his verbal from Georgia and he was thinking about, well, gosh, do I want to go to Miami? The talk was that Eason could springboard Miami from a top 50 class to a top 10 class. He was that kind of level of talent at quarterback. And certainly I think he showed flashes, or he showed enough skill level that you can see why people thought that about him. I don't think he showed the performance that Bentley did last year. I still think Eason probably has more talent, but I think I was just a little bit more impressed overall with Bentley for, the simple fact that, oh, geez, this guy, A, has no time to throw. B, again, I'll say it too, he's supposed to be in high school right now. And C, forget supposed to be in high school right now. He's not supposed to be on the field right now. He's supposed to be up in the stands. But yeah, I was super impressed with Bentley. But I brought up Eason, so let's talk about Georgia and Florida. Do you feel like they are a big step ahead of the rest of the East? Because I think the whole East took a big step this year. It's just a fact of the matter. Those teams were ahead of the rest of the East for the last couple seasons, and they took the step too.
Yeah, I definitely think the East will be much, much better and is catching up with the SEC West. I think it has all to do with quarterback play for sure. And the bottom tier teams really rising their level of play. I mean, you saw both, Vanderbilt and Kentucky in the bowl game last season, if that tells you anything. I do think right now it is a race between Georgia and Florida. I think just from a roster standpoint, those two teams are probably more complete than any other. But I still think the East is wide open. I mean, especially – I'm just not sold on the Florida Gators. I mean, you're coming into a season with 3 quarterbacks. I mean, if you have 2, you have none. If you have 3, what do you have there? I mean, Malik Zaire, you get the transfer there. He hasn't really panned out. They're still looking at Felipe Franks, who's never played a collegiate snap, and then you have Luke Del Rio, which is kind of, what you see is what you get. And Florida, let's be honest, has backed their way into the SEC title game, the past couple of seasons. Jacob Eason, I agree with you. I think he has all the talent in the world. He kind of reminds me of another Zach Mettenberger from LSU. It'll just – at times last season, it looked like Eason wasn't all there, to be honest. And I think the reason that Bentley probably gets so much more hype than Eason is because Bentley didn't have Nick Chubb to hand the ball to or Sonny Michel to hand the ball to. I mean, what Bentley did, he did it with way less. He did it with another guy who was in high school the previous year, and another guy he was throwing to was in high school. So I think that's the reason Bentley gets knobbed. But I think Easton has all the capability. I mean, Georgia should be really, really good, or at least improved, on the defensive side of the football. They were a defense last year that got torched against Ole Miss. I remember watching that game and thinking, how in the world is this team going to stop anybody?
Right.
But, last season, another team that their O-line just absolutely could not block anybody, and Easton's another quarterback. He's not mobile. He's a guy that has to be, standing on his 2 feet to make plays, but they actually have Riley Ridley out at receiver as well. It'll be interesting. I think Georgia right now has to be the favorite. I think Florida, they'll probably return a pretty good defense, but this is a big year for Jim McElwain, in my opinion, because I think he was kind of, riding the coattails, if you will, off of these Will Muschamp recruits that were at Florida on defense, these great NFL products. And I'm just not 100% sold on Florida as far as being the East champion. Now, do I think it's Georgia and Florida ahead of everyone else right now? I think you have to say yes. But right now, I would definitely put Georgia ahead of Florida as far as for like a preseason ranking of those two.
Yeah, what I always tell people is to not overlook the fact that this is not 100% different from what we're used to with Florida, right? Like Steve Spurrier's teams had great defenses. Urban Meyer's teams had great defenses. Obviously, Muschamp kept that recruiting up. So Florida has always been a really good defensive school. It's just Florida should not be starting at quarterback a guy who could not crack the depth chart at Oregon State. Right, like that's not supposed to happen at the University of Florida when it comes to quarterbacks. It really concerns me that Malik Zaire didn't just walk in there and steal the starting job. It makes me wonder: has he really fallen off in a way that not only was Brian Kelly not willing to fight for him because Brian Kelly is, kind of a douchebag, but did Brian Kelly just see, hey, our future is clearly not with this kid. Let him go to Florida. That's one. The other thing that makes me wonder is if that's not the case, if Zaire is not struggling, is Jim McElwain just not a great decision maker that we thought he was? Because, it seems to me that given Zaire's talent and level of accomplishment, it would almost seem like, and granted, I haven't been in camp, but it would seem like coming into camp, it should have been kind of a no-brainer that he was going to be way ahead of Del Rio.
And that's the biggest thing that would scare me to death.
Hasn't thrown a pass yet. Whose name is?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that would scare me to death as a Florida Gators fan, is that you hired this guy, Jim McElwain, who was supposed to be this offensive guru out of Colorado State, and you just haven't seen it. I mean, since he's come to Gainesville. And look, I understand.
This is what I was talking about with what has Nick Saban done to the conference. It seems like if you coached with him, you're qualified to be a head coach. And I don't know that that's the case with a lot of these guys.
Yeah, and kind of going back as well, not just McElwain, but I mean, this is a big year for Kirby Smart too. I mean,
huge year for Kirby Smart.
It was funny as a South Carolina fan watching last fall. I kind of started thinking maybe we got the better end of the deal getting Muschamp instead of Kirby Smart. I was starting to think I'm kind of liking that hire now over the other option, but. Yeah, I mean, that Florida quarterback situation is it's pretty wild. I mean, Zaire, I understand he comes in late. I'm not sure he fits their system that well personally, but man, yeah, I mean, I can't be sold on a team that hasn't decided between three quarterbacks, and we're 4 days from kickoff. I mean, it's pretty much go time now. And to think that, Florida is talking about playing multiple quarterbacks, I just, like you said, maybe Jim McElwain's just not the offensive guru that people thought he was.
Yeah, I mean, look, he deserves all the credit in the world for getting for turning Greg McElroy into a national champion quarterback and for getting A.J. McCarron to where he was when Doug Nussmeier came in and tried to screw it all up. But yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see how he does on a big stage. Right, because Colorado State's one thing, and I'm not taking anything away from them. I think that he left the cupboard stacked pretty good for Mike Bobo out at Colorado State, where that team should have another great season. But it is different when you are recruiting not just in the most contested conference, but in the most contested state, right? Because, like, how crazy is it now to think of the 7 FBS programs in Florida? And let's just go head coaches, right? Jimbo Fisher, Mark Richt, Charlie Strong, Lane Kiffin, Butch Davis, Scott Frost. I would put all 6 of them ahead of Jim McElwain in terms of recruiters.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you as well. I mean, it's crazy where Florida falls in that ranking when you really think about it. But, yeah, things are not going to be very good in Gainesville if they go like throw a 7-5 or even an 8-4 out there. And I just think this is going to be such an interesting year because, like I said, I just feel like they've really backed their way into Atlanta the past couple seasons using those recruits that Will Muschamp had in Gainesville, those great, talented defensive linemen, those secondary players. It'll be really telling. It'll be a really telling sign. If Florida has to win with offense, it could be a very long year.
Yeah, I would agree with you. All right, let's end the show with a little game that I came up with. 10 words or less. We answer big questions almost in Twitter form, right? With big questions, we give definitive answers as short as possible. Chris has 3 for me. I have 3 for Chris. Chris, I'll get us started because my first question really comes off of what we were just talking about, that this is a big year for Kirby Smart. 10 words or less. What happens in Athens if Georgia goes 7-5 and Miami is playing for and just maybe wins an ACC title?
Restlessness between the hedges, and that is putting it as nicely as I possibly can.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be very interesting to see the reaction if Kirby Smart has another one of those years where you say, okay, he's learning to be a head coach, and the guy you fired him for is putting up a double-digit win season. And let's be honest, I think we've seen the numbers prove if you win the ACC the last couple of years, you do belong in the college football playoff, right? So if he has Miami
absolutely
competitive and then upsetting either Clemson or Florida State in the ACC championship game, I think there are going to be maybe not a lot of people, but a lot of powerful people in Athens wondering what the hell they did.
Yeah, and Mark Richt, it's hard. He's another guy it's really hard not to pull for. And I'm especially pulling for him because I think he got a really crappy deal at the end of his time in Athens. I mean, you're firing a coach that won 9 to 10 games a year. And I think Georgia kind of getting what they deserve. It really, if you ask, in my opinion, I mean, coming from a South Carolina fan, I guess you'd take it for what it's worth. But no, I really think that it'll be a real situation where they have to look themselves in the mirror and kind of go, hey, what did we just do? So,
well, I think one of the things you have to do when you look at yourself in the mirror, because I actually understand the logic of, all right, is 9-3 this guy's ceiling? Is he capable of getting us to the next level? But maybe what you have to do is look yourself in the mirror and think, did we not value our program enough? Because Georgia should be the most desirable job in the SEC. It should be. It's become more fertile recruiting ground, probably faster than any other state I can remember. And let's be honest, there is no challenge from Georgia Tech in terms of getting Georgia kids to come play for you, where there's a huge challenge to Jim McElwain in Florida.
No, absolutely none. Yeah, I agree. I think Georgia's one of the best jobs in the conference.
Yeah.
I think it's right up there with Alabama. So it'll be really, I mean, if Georgia goes 7-5, it'll be hell in Athens. That's for sure. That could be another 3 words for you.
All right, give me your first one.
So my first one for you, Dimitri, what happens if Jalen Hurts can't progress as a downfield passer?
We are going to see Tua. Period. Like we're going to see Tua. And I don't mean that we're going to see a quick, definitive shift to the true freshman Tua Tagovailoa to be the starting quarterback. Period in Alabama. But look, there is restlessness, right? There are people that are going to be calling for that pretty much right away if Hurts doesn't come out and throw a touchdown on his first series against Florida State. I think that what Tua coming to Tuscaloosa has done is shown a lot of not just fans, but a lot of people on that coaching staff that Hurts was not the best of a bad bunch because he was legit good last season, but he probably would not have been starting if there was a definitive returning guy, right? If there was an experienced returning guy, Hurts probably would not have been the starter last season. And I've been saying this all along, him winning SEC Offensive Player of the Year last year speaks more to the abysmal offenses in the SEC last season than it does to his talent. I'm a huge fan of Jalen, but I just think if you look at what really happened last year, it's that SEC offenses were bad, and this quarterback that really could not throw accurately downfield was good enough to be the best in the conference.
Yeah, I would absolutely tend to agree with you. I mean, it'll be – I know that Tua is a really talented player and the guy they're really high on, but this is going to be a big season for Jalen Hurts as far as taking the next step as a quarterback and really being able to lead this Alabama team with maybe, like I said, a lot of shuffling pieces on defense, maybe not so dominant as they've been in years past. But, yeah, I mean, I think Jalen Hurts has to take that next step, progress to downfield passer, or, Alabama, there's a chance they could become very one-dimensional.
Yeah, I would agree with you. All right, let's talk about that because that actually does play into my next one for you. Was Brian Daboll really the best offensive coordinator hire Nick Saban could have made?
Is New York strip the best steak you can get? That would be my response to that. No, I don't think it was. Listen, I know that Daboll has worked with in the NFL a ton. He worked under Bill Belichick, and it's sort of like Nick Saban. Anyone that works under Bill Belichick sort of gets that stamp, that seal of approval.
Right. Well, remember, he was a graduate assistant under Saban at Michigan State, too.
Right. Yeah, he's a Saban disciple, if you will. But,
right.
I mean, he wasn't really overwhelmingly impressive in the NFL. I mean, in 2012, he was with the Chiefs. They were 24th in the NFL in offense. He was with the Dolphins. They were 22nd. He was with Cleveland. They were 32nd and 29th in his 2 seasons there. So, I mean, I'm just not fully convinced, that Daboll was, and especially coming from Lane Kiffin. I just think Nick Saban wasn't going to have somebody that's going to challenge his authority so much while
right.
he's the man there. I think that was something Nick Saban absolutely did not like. So it'll be really, really interesting to see. Like I said, I think this is going to go hand in hand with Jalen Hurts' progression as a downfield passer, as a quarterback as a whole. But, this guy, Daboll, he's bringing in, his track record's not exactly the best that I've ever seen. So I think there had to be a ton of other options, better options, but it's kind of one of those things, like I said earlier, where a lot of SEC coaches and a lot of SEC schools like to keep things in house. They like to take care of the guys that have worked for them, and Brian Daboll looks like he's just the next example of that.
Even before Steve Sarkisian sort of surprised everybody and bolted for the NFL after one game as Alabama's offensive coordinator. But even before that happened, I thought Mike Locksley was such the smarter guy to move up to offensive coordinator. I know he's got the co in his title this year, that Locksley technically will be the co-offensive coordinator. Dude, that's to me, that's the guy, right? Like, that's, if you're going to simplify the playbook anyway, why not go with the guy that is the proven recruiter as your offensive coordinator? But, we will see as the season progresses. I hope Daboll proves us all wrong. I really do.
Yeah.
Because I graduated from Alabama, period.
Period.
All right. What's your next one?
All right. So my next one for you, we kind of going back to something we talked about earlier. Can Florida win the East while playing 3 quarterbacks?
This will be as 10 words or less as possible. No. I mean, I don't know how much more. I don't know how much more elaboration that needs. Like, it's how long can you realistically go playing 3 quarterbacks when your first game is Michigan, right? Like, you have to hope by series number 4 you have figured out who your starter is.
Yeah, I guess play each one on the first 3 series and pick one. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it'll be that opening with Michigan is going to be extremely tough. They play that game in Arlington. Is that right?
That's right.
Arlington, Texas. Right. So yeah, opening with Michigan, the Fighting Jim Harbaugh's got suspended for that game, but just going throughout the year. Yeah. Like I said before, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. It's kind of the saying, and especially if you have 3, I don't really know what you have. So I think that's going to be a really big question mark for Florida and something that I don't think enough people are talking about.
No, I agree with you. And I think that the other thing to remember here, too, is, they play Northern Colorado right after Michigan, but then they turn around and play Tennessee. And I think Tennessee is going to take a huge step backwards this year, not just because of the transfers, but a lot of guys left that team and they're replacing a ton. Even still, Tennessee has been recruiting pretty solidly, and they have a pretty good, I'm not going to say great, they do have a pretty good core of guys coming back on defense. If you're unsure after your first game against another top 25 team and then against a cupcake where you really get the chance to get a longer look at these guys wide open and you still don't know who your quarterback is, you might as well put Georgia down in Penn representing the East in Atlanta in December.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you.
All right, my last one for you. What will Ole Miss have to do to get the head coach they want at the end of the season?
I love this one. So what will Ole Miss have to do? Roll out the red carpet and empty the bank account. Listen, I don't think there's any other way to sugarcoat it. What's going on at Ole Miss is an absolute train wreck. It's chaos. It's pure chaos. And I think that
Let me ask you this. What do you think Ole Miss has to do this season for Matt Luke to be seriously considered for that job?
Oh, I think they got to win 8 games at least. I mean, and even at that point, I'm just not sure. I think that, Ole Miss, while they're having a ton of things go wrong there, all of the sanctions, I mean, there's probably more to even come. If you give the right coach the right amount of dollar signs, the right amount of money, you can get a good coach in there to come in, understand the situation. I mean, Ole Miss still has good football players. They've got to, really, I think a thing that's blown my mind all preseason. It's because of everything that's happened with Hugh Freeze getting, fired or, stepping down, if you will. Shea Patterson's probably one of the best young quarterbacks in the conference, and nobody's talking about it.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing that, to me, makes it really tough on Matt Luke, is because I don't think you got to win 8 games. There's NFL caliber talent there. I think you've got to win 10, and your first 6 choices have to say no before Matt Luke has a legit shot of getting this job.
Yeah, I mean they're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at somebody to get them in there, and I think somebody's going to take it. It's an opportunity to coach in the SEC.
Right.
You have solid facilities. You have the chance to go up against the best week in and week out. So even with that situation, but they're going to have to give it all. And I mean, the numbers I imagine will be ludicrous and extremely high for what they'll pay the next guy coming in. They'll have to. They'll just have to, for someone to kind of take the sacrifice, take the plunge, and go into Oxford and face all of those allegations and bowl bans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they'll just have to, find their guy and try to, pitch him as much as they can to get him to come take care of what's going on down there.
Yeah, and I would say it's a pretty safe bet that they are not going to hire another guy who 3 years before he was Ole Miss's head coach was coaching at NAIA. You're right. I mean, it's probably a safe bet you're going to hire someone that something about this time.
Absolutely. Around. No, I completely agree. I think they need an established name, and I think they can get one. So
I think they can get, what I think they could get probably pretty easily is they could get, what's the guy's name at Lafayette? Is it Mark Hudspeth? And I'm not talking about him specifically. I'm talking about a guy that has consistently won at that Conference USA or Sun Belt level. A guy that has shown you over a period of time that he can sustain with limited resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I think it will be interesting to see. I think they need a name. They need some type of stability. It is Mark Hudspeth. And I just think they need some type of stability to come in and fix that program, and kind of similar to what Baylor's done, maybe get a bigger name or better name than that. But I do think Ole Miss, even with all that, is a good job for the right guy. So,
yeah. Difference between Ole Miss and Baylor, though, is there is no mistaking that the NCAA certainly has jurisdiction with Ole Miss, whereas both Baylor and North Carolina have played it brilliantly, making the NCAA question whether or not they're allowed to even rule on these cases.
Right.
All right. You've got the last one, I think.
I've got the last one. Pretty simple. I'm interested to get your feedback, though. Simply, who's the best quarterback in the SEC?
All right, I gave you one word last time. I'll give you 10 this time. Jalen Hurts until someone else lives up to the hype. Because, I mean, you're right. Shea Patterson should be there. Jacob Eason should be there. Jake Bentley arguably should be there too. But until any of these guys show me that they're the quarterback that we all believe they can be, you got to go with the guy that was the offensive player of the year last year.
Yeah, I think Nick Fitzgerald's another really good one at Mississippi State. I don't think his team will be good enough to where everybody will be talking about him, but I think he's a really good player. I mean, really great setter on the ground as well.
And look, we left the most obvious choice. We haven't even mentioned him yet. Jarrett Stidham probably is the best quarterback in this conference. It's just we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, Stidham, I think, has the most to prove just because he hasn't taken a snap in the SEC. And, like I said, what he did prior to Auburn was great, but I think it's going to be a completely different animal. But I think he obviously has the potential and the ability to be one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. I tend to agree with you. I just don't think I think until someone else separates themselves or proves themselves, I think you could say Jalen Hurts, but I think I'd give it 3 or 4 games, and we're going to be talking about one of these younger guys is one of the best quarterback in the SEC. I don't think it'll be close.
You were talking about a really good quarterback that has flown under the radar and will continue to fly under the radar because Missouri's not going to a bowl again. Drew Lock is pretty damn good.
Yeah, their offense is fantastic. I mean, I'm not sure. I think he threw for almost 4,000 yards, or was it over 4,000 yards last season? Either way, they were dynamic on offense. They can't stop anybody on defense.
And isn't it amazing? Those 2 years they went to the SEC championship game, it was polar opposites, right? Like they were supposed to have really good offenses that could keep up with a defense that went through. What did they go from Michael Sam to Coney Ely to Shane Ray? I mean, like every year a dude left for the NFL and another awesome defensive end was right there behind them, and their offense just could never live up to what it was supposed to be. They had the one Dorial Green Beckham or Dorial Beckham, whichever.
Green Beckham, yeah.
They had 1 year with him, and it still didn't click the way it was supposed to. I just, I know Missouri caught lightning in a bottle with Gary Pinkel, right? And it's going to be a long time until that program can do that again. But man, I don't know if Barry Odom is cut out to be a head coach in this league.
Yeah, and I actually read something just a little bit off topic, but I read something a couple weeks ago talking about, have A&M and Missouri kind of solidify themselves as fitting in as members of the SEC. And I think Missouri is still kind of the verdict is still out there. It doesn't have the right feel to it, and especially with the performance on the field too.
Yeah, you know what I think part of it's going to be too, and I know that we're an SEC football show, but really, what can Michael Porter do for Mizzou's basketball team? That will make them feel like, okay, this was what we thought we were getting in the SEC, because Missouri has never been a powerhouse in basketball, but they've always been competitive, apparently, until they came to the SEC, where they should have been considerably more competitive.
Absolutely. But yeah, going back to Locke, I think he's a great quarterback. I think he's a guy that, like you said, not a ton of people will talk about just because Missouri's not going to be that good. They'll probably finish 6th or 7th in the SEC East. But yeah, I think that the guys you mentioned, Bentley, Eason, Fitzgerald, Stidham, I think they'll all be ahead of, or most will be ahead of Jalen Hurts, come season's end. I need to see it from Jalen Hurts progressing as a downfield passer, and all those guys possess that ability to throw the ball down the field. So
right. And, the other thing too is all these guys, Stidham, Eason, I'm just trying to think of the ones that, like, you would especially say this about Locke, Bentley, they're going to get a lot more opportunities to throw the ball down the field than Jalen Hurts will. Period. I mean, that's just the case. I mean, Nick Saban probably did not bring in one of his disciples to have him come in with his own playbook.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's not Lane Kiffin running the show anymore.
Right.
So it might get a little vanilla on offense.
Right. All right. So that is going to do it for the first episode of The Congregation. You can always find us at armchairallamericans.com or get us wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you want to close up with, Chris?
Excited for the weekend. We'll have a lot of games to talk about when we come back next week, and really excited to watch the slate of games. I know Alabama, Florida State's the one we've all got circled. Florida, Michigan, but I think South Carolina, NC State's a really underrated good matchup, SEC versus ACC, and obviously, like we said, the hot seat bowl with A&M, UCLA. So And then Tennessee, Georgia Tech on Monday night. I almost forgot. Yeah, that's another game that'll be a really interesting, really fun game to watch in Atlanta. So just a ton of great games on the slate, and just so excited for the weekend.
Your Gamecocks they are in a position of having to bring the Championship of Life title belt back to the SEC. As NC State's the last team holding it.
I did read that. I guess I wouldn't mind them taking it for this sole purpose, but I'm not going to wear it proudly.
All right. Before we wrap up today, I just real quick just want to just say something real fast. We have in this conference, we're in a very odd area of the country, right? Where we have seen Baton Rouge devastated. We've seen Tuscaloosa devastated. We've seen Columbia devastated. And now it's happening in Houston, which is about 45 minutes away from A&M. So find a way you can help. Whether your thing is helping the animals, whether it's helping people, whether it's donating clothes money, whatever, whether it is the Red Cross or you seek out local shelters, do something to help. I don't know when or if A&M is going to be playing a home game this season. We do know that we've already seen LSU have to move the BYU game to New Orleans. It's going to be a long time before Houston is Houston again, and that is a city that very quietly, since A&M joined the conference, has meant a lot to the SEC. So if you love college football, take care of the people of Houston. Seek out and help however you see fit best. Until next week, I'm Dimitri. He's Chris. This is The Congregation.